Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. In today's podcast, I sit down with Bethany Preud'homme from PH Dogs. She is certified by the Certification Council for Professional Dog Trainers and is an evaluator for the American Kennel Club's Canine Good Citizen Temperament Test. Bethany has been training dogs professionally since 2010, and in her free time, Bethany enjoys hiking and competition training with her dogs in the French ring sport, where she has handled, trained, and titled multiple dog breeds to include the German Shepherd breed, Malinois, Australian Kettle Dog, and the Belgian Tervuren. Bethany's passion for hiking and dogs combined it in 2013 when she and her Belgian Malinois Grisby were the first canine team to complete a thru-hike on the Continental Divide National Scenic Trail, walking from Canada to Mexico, a total of 3,000 miles. So without further ado, please welcome the one and only Bethany Preud'homme. Hey, thanks again for having me out. I really appreciate it. So let's go ahead and jump right in. We filmed a protection series last week. This has been on really high demand. A lot of people have been asking me about it, and you're one of the first individuals I thought about, you and Jean-Luc, because I love the way you guys train. It's very comparable to the way that I train and also a lot of my followers. So last week we filmed a small introduction series on French ring, and I want to talk about it a little bit and kind of get everyone excited for it.
Yeah, French ring is not a simple sport, so trying to just do an intro is really difficult to do, but I think we did a good job at least getting everything started.
Definitely. And in the beginning, we start with the puppies. That's one of the biggest things, is taking a puppy and imprinting them for the sport or whatever it is you want to do. So if somebody, most people who are competing in any sport, I would imagine, protection sport or even AKC, agility, they like to start when they're a puppy.
Yeah.
Now, why is that so important?
It's just like, so it's getting the dog to like the game. So just like with little kids, you start them in T-ball. That doesn't mean that they're going to go play Major League, but most Major League players started playing T-ball. So it is possible for in people to start a sport, around 12 years old, but you're not going to start at age 25 and expect to go to the major leagues just because you don't have the experience. And the same thing with puppies. You can start a dog that's green, and green means just doesn't have any prior training, but usually they're an older dog, like 6 months up would be considered a green dog. And it is possible to start with those kinds of dogs, but it's always better if you can lay a nice solid foundation and teach them from the get-go.
It's funny, when I first heard someone say green dog when I was fresh into dog training, I had no idea what it was. I'm like, what do you mean? What is a green dog? And the funny part was, it was when I was at the Tom Rose School. I had completed the professional program, and I went back and I was filming some training videos with Tom Rose, and I had the dog that I put through the course, one of the dogs, which was a long-haired Dutch Shepherd, and this dog was such a goof. I mean, he's a search and rescue dog right now.
Yeah.
But it's kind of funny because when we were filming, Tom Rose goes, "Whose green dog is this?" I'm like, wait, green dog?
After training, that's not very nice.
Well, that dog was such a knucklehead. I love him to death. He's a great dog. And like I said, he's doing search and rescue now. But it was the first dog that I ever trained. So I made so many mistakes. I mean, every mistake you could think about, I pretty much made. And when I was going through the school, my biggest critique that I had, and we could touch a little bit on this too, because it is very important when it comes to training a dog and why it was such a big mistake for me. Because I was trying to learn a skill set. I wanted to be very good at training dogs. And I know that takes more than just reading about it and studying about it. You need actual application to really get that comprehension level. So I would train from 9 a.m. when class started. I'm a night owl. And then I would train till 10 o'clock at night, 10 p.m. And I trained the dogs constantly. So I overtrained the dogs. I stressed them out. I made them not enjoy the training. And that was my biggest critique. They're like, you're overworking your dogs. What are some of the issues that people can have besides some of the ones that I had if they are overtraining, they're not reading the dog correctly?
That we just said, not reading the dog correctly. So you have to see, you always, with puppies especially when you're first starting out, you want to leave them wanting more. So if you train till they're like, okay, I'm done, I don't want to play with you anymore, I don't want to eat anymore, I'm tired, they start shade seeking if it's hot, you're losing motivation versus leaving the dog on a high note, leave them wanting more. When they're at their peak, that's when you end it. And that's the hardest thing. Almost every single dog trainer, me including, goes, one more, just one more. And the problem with that is if you keep asking for more and the dog doesn't have anything else to give, you might be working on one part of the equation, but you're ruining everything else because the motivation's not there. The biggest thing with dog training is you have to have motivation. either to avoid something or to get something. It doesn't matter which kind, but you have to have that motivation. That motivation is energy. And if you have a dog that's super tired, that is full, that is bored, they're not going to give you that 100% because they don't have that to give. So it's reading the dog and noticing, okay, the dog isn't giving 110%. Let's stop now. Don't push it until the dog is totally flat and done.
Yeah, and then knowing when that level or that barrier was for the dog to know to stop a little earlier next time, so you can stop them when they are at that really heightened state. And then talking about motivation, this is also something me and Oscar Moore talked about it a little bit on our podcast episode, but sometimes you'll see maybe a photo where it shows a dog doing protection training and then somebody saying, oh, how cruel of this to teach a dog to do something like this. Well, when we're training dogs to do any sort of protection sport, or even real protection, you've worked with a lot of police departments as well, correct? These dogs love it. I mean, it's what they are bred to do. And that's another thing that's so great about French ring, is that it's a breed standard test for the Malinois, right?
Yeah, originally it was in France. The problem, if you have a dog that's been bred to do the work, the dogs love it. It's definitely not cruel or anything like that. If you have a dog that doesn't have the right temperament for it, they don't want to work, they don't have the character or the confidence to do it, then yeah, you can be dragging the dog out of the car onto the field because they don't really want to be there. And in that situation, it's better to find something that dog does like to do: dock diving, agility, obedience, couch potato, and get a dog that does want to do the work. Just because the dog isn't good at French ring doesn't mean that there aren't other dog sports the dog can't excel at. And if you want a dog for French ring, get a dog that's for French ring. And that means that the dog that you picked up off of Craigslist or got from a rescue at 3 years old, it might be a Malinois, but that doesn't mean that it has the right genetics and the drives to do well in the sport. And if you really want to do the sport, that dog might be perfect to learn on, and kind of get yourself accustomed to the sport, find a club. But then if you really want to compete, you might need to get an appropriate dog for that.
I think it's good to have a dog to learn from initially as well, because you're going to make a lot of mistakes, just like I mentioned, less than a few minutes ago. So a dog that's really motivated to do it, that's going to make the training significantly easier. Going back to when I was a student and I was first learning about dog training, I thought any dog could be trained to do anything. I was like, a dog's a dog. You could teach any dog to do it, which is really not the case. And I like that you said couch potato too, because some dogs, that's all they want to do. I mean, I have people message me all the time. They're wanting to do certain things with their dogs, or maybe their dog won't bark, or they don't get excited for the toy. And not every dog is built the same. Some may enjoy toys, some may not. Some may prefer food, some may not care about either, especially if they're feeding them out of a bowl. Now, that's something I talk about quite often, where I have somebody and they say their dog's not food motivated. How many food or dogs have you run into that are not food motivated at all?
So it's usually the people who are also free feeding, and then feeding them wet food with their dry food, or the dog is eating a raw diet and just getting more than their fair share, and they have like the highest value food possible and they're getting it for free. So why would they work for a piece of hot dog when they're getting, if the hot dog's a level 7 in terms of hierarchy and rewards, why would they work for a 7 when they're getting 10 for free? There's just no reason to, unless you have a total chow hound that'll work for anything. And then again, that goes back to just, does the dog have the correct drives or not? But you can definitely, if the dog from puppyhood is used to just having everything always be available, to food, toys, then again, why would you work for it? There's no reason to. So the rougher their start is, and again, rough is when I say rough, I'm talking to, working for your food, working for your toys, just earning your living for a dog. That's going to build a more motivated dog. If everything is free, they've got 20 toys laying out, tug toys that they can play with whenever they want. They have food whenever they want. Again, they don't have that motivation to work for it, unless you really have the dog that will still work through that. But you're spoiling them, and then you're asking them to go work, 40-hour week. Why would they do that if they're a trust fund kid? They don't have that motivation. They might go volunteer if they really like their job, but they're not going to put in the work as if they need that money or if they need that food or the toys.
Right. It's like having a spoiled child. You can spoil a dog just like you can spoil a child. And once you spoil them, then why are they going to want to work for something?
Yeah, they have no motivation.
If you have somebody new, you have your own French ring club?
We do.
So when you have somebody new, let's say somebody comes down, they want to join your club, and they have a brand new puppy, what are some of the first things you like to do with a puppy when you're assessing them to see if they are going to be a good student for protection training or French ring?
So the first thing that I do is check the dog's socialization. I want to see their confidence. I want to see how they react coming to a new field, how they are around new people, how they are with some different sounds, and then usually I'll have the owners just kind of show me what they've done with the dog. If that means luring with food, if that means nothing, if that means just playing with the dog. I just want to see the relationship. And then usually we'll check the dog's food drive. I'll have them do a couple little healing exercises, just following the food. Might start introducing a clicker. I'll bring out a toy and see how willing they are to bring something back if something gets thrown, or if they take it off and they're super independent. And then we kind of go from there. We also usually will check the dog's prey drive just with a little flirt pole with a tug on the end, and just kind of whip it back and forth and see if the dog is motivated to chase or not. Some dogs in certain lines are a little bit slower to mature, like German Shepherds in general are slower to mature than Malinois. There's still some Malinois lines that, like the NVBK, the real Belgian lines, are slower to mature than the French lines. So if I know the pedigree, I know the parents, if I know some of those things, it's easier to kind of help shape the dog, because I know genetically what they're more predisposed to have in terms of their development. Some dogs are just, like the hardest dog to train is a dog that is very confident and independent and doesn't have a lot of drive, because they don't need you and they don't care. So those types of dogs, I want them skinny and hungry. I want them crated, coming out for play, going back in the crate, or a kennel run. I want those types of dogs to fall in love with their handler. I want them to look for their handler for everything, because I know genetically they're more predisposed to have a lot of independence. And for French ring, because in a ring 3 routine, you're looking at about 45 minutes, no rewards, no corrections, just you and the dog, you have to have a good relationship. So that's the biggest thing in French ring, is you have to have, the dog has to like you at least a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. With French ring, let's actually talk a little bit about the sport. So you just mentioned French ring 3. That's the top level, and it usually takes anywhere from 40 to 50 minutes on average, somewhere between that, to complete the entire routine.
Yeah, it just depends on how the judge has everything laid out. If it's a very fluid trial, it's going to be a little bit shorter. If one exercise is starting across the field and the next one starts on the opposite, there's a lot of walking between exercises. But most of the time on a ring 3, if you've got a full day, the judge will set it up where it's very fluid, and so it's going to go a little bit faster. So French ring sport is essentially it's a breed test that was originated in France. You've got agility, obedience, and protection. Unlike Schutzen or IGP or IPO, whatever they call it now, it's all fluid. So you go from your jumps to your obedience to your protection or your bite work. It's not one portion and then in the afternoon you do another portion, the next day you do another portion. So for the dogs, it tests control a lot, because as the dogs get better, they understand, after my jumps we have an obedience, and after the obedience we go to bite work. So you'll see some of the dogs that are a little bit more full of themselves, after the jumps they start looking for the decoy. I've seen a dog do the hurdle and then turn that into a search, because they've heard the bite work going on before. They know that if they hurry up and get through that stuff, they get to the good stuff, the protection work. So it's a very difficult test. It tests the dog's athleticism with the agility portion. So you've got a hurdle.
How far is that jump, the long jump?
So the broad jump, so you've got the hurdle, which the max height is 1.2 meters. You've got the broad jump, which is the long jump. That max is 4.5 meters. And then you have the palisade, which is the wood wall, and that's 2.3 meters. So you have to have a very athletic dog to do the work, and they have to have good technique, because it's not something that's just easy for every dog to fly over.
And very confident, especially the high wall.
Yeah.
With that one, so there's a lot of debate on whether or not you should have a puppy practicing any sort of jumps, because their hips are still developing.
Yeah.
Is that something, how would you work around that when you're trying to train a puppy for French ring and you want to get them to like the jumps and have that good positive association with it during the imprinting stage, but still not overdoing it to a point where you may hurt the hips? At least that's something that people discuss quite often.
Yeah, so you definitely want to respect the dog's body, number one. So I think in our video we talk about a lot, like not overheating your dog, watching signs for overheating, watching what your dog's normal is in terms of their gait. Look for any abnormalities, make sure you're warming up your dog, make sure you're giving them water if they need it, and make sure that you're cooling them down after. So a lot of people pull their dog out of the car from training, they go straight to the field. They don't potty their dog, they don't stretch them, they don't do any kind of tug warm-ups, and you can make a lot of problems that way.
Is pottying on the field an NQ for French ring?
It's not, it's 5 points.
It's 5 points.
Yeah.
It's NQ and IGP, I believe, right?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
But it's
non-qualify or disqualify, whatever.
It's 5 points, but say you're doing a search, the dog is doing the search, they stop and take a dump and they forget what they're doing, you very well could lose that whole exercise. Or if they stop and go to the bathroom and then they displace more than however many meters, you can have problems. Or if you're doing your heeling and the leash gets tight, again, you lose all those points. So just going to the bathroom is the 5 points, but in the big picture, it can cost you a lot.
Way more.
Yeah. So
sure.
Make sure that you warm up your dog, cool them down, make sure they go potty, all of those things before you go on the field.
And that even goes with basic pet training too. I mean, sometimes if you have a dog that you're training, and this goes with any dog trainer, whether they're a professional dog trainer out there or a personal dog trainer, they're just training their own pets. It's still important to start to recognize little things like that. So for example, one of my puppies that I trained back in 2012, if I had her in a stay, whether it was a sit stay or down stay, she was really good at the stays, but every now and then she would randomly get up. And at first I didn't know what it was because I really wasn't able to read her, and I found out every time she got up and started walking around, it was because she had to go to the bathroom.
Yep.
Or I've had other dogs where they just did not seem with it that day, and it's because they were sick.
Yep.
So being, of course, very aware of your dog is important, because then you don't want to get that negative association to training because they're feeling bad. And this actually brings me to teething. This is another big question that's asked quite often is, should I still play tug with my puppy when they're going through teething? What's the best way to assess it to make sure I'm not creating any sort of bad I'm not creating any bad association? Like, what's the best way to approach it when you have a puppy that's teething and you want to do bite work?
So there's a lot, that's a question that depends on who you ask. For me, it also depends on the dog. So some dogs can bite and their teeth are falling off in the sleeve and they leave it all bloody because their teeth are falling out and they're just bleeding everywhere and they don't care. You get some dogs, they bite, they pop a tooth, it hurts, and now they're really munchy and they don't have a good bite because it hurts. And so if you train that dog that gets munchy through that teething, it's very possible every time that you train, you're teaching the dog to have that negative association with the biting, or you're teaching them to do this a lot, which you don't want. So for me, it's not worth it. I don't. I find that if the dog is a good dog genetically, you can stop as soon as they start teething, focus on your obedience, which is a good time to just focus on obedience. That way you know the dog bites. They've already been exposed to the stick. I usually expose them to the gunfire beforehand. They take that nice break from 4 to 6 months while they're finishing all their teeth. Once their teeth are grown in, then we'll start bite work again. But that's a nice month and a half or 2 months where I can really focus on my obedience. And that way when they do start teething, I know that they have their full teeth and they're not going to be sliding off the bite just because they don't have any teeth to hold on to. I know that they can give me nice full pressure and then I can build that bite that way. So I don't think that there's any reason, if you have a dog like a Beauceron or a German Shepherd or something that you need to kind of build up and you need that time, frustration. So bring them out, let another dog watch, tease them for a bite, have them go to the car. Or tease them for a bite, let them win, they grab it, no tension on there, and let them carry it to the car. That way you're not working on the tugging, you're not working on the gripping, you're just that initial bite and carry, that's it. And if you're doing that, there shouldn't be any negative associations. But sometimes, like the Beaucerons, some German Shepherds, they need that build up to maintain that motivation.
Kind of
for
that
the bites.
reminder.
Yeah.
Some of the other dogs may not need it, especially if you do a really nice job with the imprinting.
Yeah.
Because usually the imprinting is completed before they even start teething, right? Or it's near the end of the imprinting stage.
So
sometimes.
Yeah, it just depends. So a lot of dogs will work like in French ring. We use a lot of prey drive. And the prey drive is just their compulsion to bite and catch things that are moving. So if the dog has a lot of prey drive, you really don't need to do that during that break. If you have a dog that has, again, a lot of times Beaucerons, German Shepherds, they have some prey drive, but they really do well with frustration. That frustration can, again, build that drive, and that's where I would work them during teething, but just frustration, watching other dogs work, really building that up, and that way when they do finish their teething and they're ready, they're like, let me have it, because they've been frustrated for the last month. So that it really helps them kind of bring it if they need it. Malinois, if you do too much of that, you just make them crazy and hectic, and then good luck controlling them after that.
Right.
So it just depends on the dog. But too much frustration in a sport like French ring that you really need control is not a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Something that I thought was really cool too when we were filming, even when you just brought out the puppy, you're working with the puppy, a lot of the things that you're doing, of course, you don't just do them all at once the very first time. You introduce them and then you bring it together. That's how you start to get that final picture. But a lot of the stuff you're doing is a lot of the things, of course, that I've already taught on my YouTube channel too, like the place bowl, but then seeing it in different applications. Because like, let's say, for example, in my video, I use it more for the heel position, teaching the dog to flip into heel, teaching the dog the rear end awareness, and doing an exercise that's fun. But then using that to help with the jumps or using it to help with just proper position. It's cool to see how all these different tools come together in order to help teach a dog a specific task that you're working on.
Yeah. So, I mean, something as simple as like targeting or a place ball. You can use it for fronts. You can use it for heeling. You can use it for position for your jumps. You can use it for object guard. You can use it for like position, sit down, stand to keep the dog from creeping forward. You could use it for a send away. You can use it for so many different things. You could use it for your your seen retrieve to teach the dog to go out in front of you to come back. So it's a nice foundation behavior that I'll use for a lot of things. So all of the things that I do with my early puppy imprinting, they're things that I'm going to use everywhere. So I really want the dog to be like a magnet to their place board. I want them to see it and run to it and put their paws on, like, what are we going to do? Because I'm going to use that in a lot of different places. Same thing with my front position. I'm going to use that for my retrieves. I'm going to use that for my recall. I'm going to use that for the escort. I'm going to use it for a lot of different places. So I want my dog comfortable being really close, right in that front area or behind, depending on where I want them for the escort. Same thing, I'll do heeling on my right, heeling on the left, just to keep the dog balanced, and if I'm going to use that for my escort. So it's a lot of my puppy stuff is going to be used in a lot of different places. So I just want them happily doing that and happy to do the work. But to go back to, we were talking about jumps earlier, about what age I start the jumps. So I don't start jumps until, I'll do my foundation stuff, just with targets going back and forth, but no jumping at all until they're at least a year. If I have a dog that's going to be like an 80-pound dog, I'll wait even longer because I want them to finish growing. Jumps are not hard to teach. If the dog is athletic, teaching them not to touch and to go over in place and come back is not difficult. But if you jump too early and you make problems, then it's much more difficult to fix later. And it's one of those situations where there are rules in terms of, you can't touch it, either the broad jump or the hurdle. And so you are adding a little bit of stress in terms of if you make a mistake. So some dogs, when they do their hurdle, if they hit it, they're like, "Ooh, I hit it, I'm sorry." And if the puppy isn't mentally mature enough, you can make problems. If the dog doesn't care, they're just a brute, they're just crashing through it, and then you can make problems that way. So I like to wait mentally for the dog to be a year, and physically I like them to be a year. But before that, I can teach them the pattern of, I stand in the middle, I have one target on one side, one target on the other side, and I say, go target, and the dog goes across, and it goes there, and I tell them stay, and they take a down position, I can say, go target, and they'll go back, and I can practice the whole pattern without there actually being a jump. The broad jump.
I like that too when you were filming that. I thought that was really cool. And another thing I noticed too is you also start retrieval training very early, but you make it a game.
Yep. It's just fetch. I can teach the dog to hold, but I want them to want to bring it to me. I want them to feel comfortable that as soon as I grab it, it's not time to go check out and see what else is going on. I want them to come back. Like you see in the video that we do, I sit down with them, I let them jump on me, I pet them while they're holding it, then I'll take it and I'll throw it again. That way they're not trying to play keep away and being too possessive of it, thinking that I'm just going to take it from them. So I let them kind of possess it, I'll pet them with it, I'll do a couple little tugs or kind of poke at it just to make sure that I've got that firm grip. My friend Sarah Pirelli and her boyfriend Marco have a website called, I think it's Canemo, and they have a really good retrieve series, and I've picked some parts of how they do their retrieve for IPO, because IPO you can't have any kind of munching, and they have a lot of points on those retrieves. So I like to pick certain things from different trainers because I'm always learning, and I look at sports that are really judged highly on those parts that I'm picking from. So if I want a dog that's like an object guard, for example, in French ring it's always just a basket. In another sport called Mondio ring, it can be anything. So sometimes it can, depending on what their theme is. So for example, if it was Gosh, I've seen strollers being used. I've used a bicycle. I've seen a trash can with balloons on it. So if I was going to really try to train a basket, I'm going to look at a sport like Mondio that has a lot of distractions. They have more than one decoy. Their object guard is harder than French ring. So when I'm trying to teach my object guard, I'm going to take parts of Mondio ring sport. If I'm looking to do retrieving, I'm going to pick parts from either AKC Obedience that has some retrieves, or I'm going to pick it from IPO or IGP that has a lot of emphasis on those retrieves. If I'm looking at doing agility or my broad jump, I'm going to look at agility sports and how those trainers do it. So I'm always looking at different sports, different dog sports, and picking different things to see what I can use to help my dogs do better in this sport. If I train just for French ring, I'm staying in my little bubble and I'm not expanding and learning as much as I can. If I look at AKC trainers, if I look at agility trainers, if I look at IGP, even if I have no interest in playing those sports, there's always something that you can pick and learn to make yourself a better trainer. So I'm always looking at other people and trying to pick what I can and apply it where I can.
I couldn't agree more. I'm constantly looking at different sports and seeing what they're doing. I started off doing PSA, which I had a blast doing that, and then learning about French ring. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And then, of course, IGP, as well as doing AKC, and having all that experience, I think definitely helps, but constantly learning.
Yeah.
Something else that you did when you were working with the puppy, and you worked with a few puppies when we were filming, but this is something that I'm often asked. You're probably asked this as well. People have issues with things such as recall or some of the really simple commands, and it's because they're asking their dogs or their puppies to do certain things without having a way to reinforce it, especially in the early stages. So I believe you had one puppy that wasn't as good as coming back to you as the other one, and so you had a long line on that puppy, and you were able to use that to help direct and guide the dog so the dog was successful. How important is it to recognize something like that when you're working with dogs to make sure you're constantly setting them up for success in the beginning? Of course, there's times when we set them up for failure as well for certain things. Like I set dogs up for failure when I'm potty training them, so I can have an opportunity like, hey, don't do that inside the house. But more importantly, for obedience, and recall is a really big one, whether it's for a sport or somebody's own personal dog. They expect the dog to always come to them, and they're like, why doesn't my dog come to me? I have my dog in the yard running around playing, but the dog doesn't come to me. What are some of your recommendations for that, especially with the recall, because that is so important?
So three kind of rules, and hopefully I'll remember the third because I just drew a blank, but three rules for training. If anybody listened to nothing else but took these rules, they would be fine. So don't give commands unless you're willing and able to follow through. So if the dog is in the backyard barking at the squirrel on the fence and you know they're not going to come, don't call them. You know they're not going to come. All it does is teach the dog that they don't have to, and that they can blow you off and keep doing whatever they're doing. So if you know that the dog isn't going to follow through, don't call them. And a lot of people have such a hard time with that, letting that dog bark at the fence and not going out there and yelling at them or saying come 20 times. Like, let it go. The next time you let the dog out, you put a 20-foot line on them. And before you call them, you walk to the end of it and you pick it up. Then you call your dog to come with your treats in your pocket or your toy or whatever. You set yourself up to succeed. If you know the dog isn't going to do it, you forgot to put the leash on him, whatever, you go, oh, I messed up. Next time I'll be prepared. And set yourself up to succeed by leaving your long leash by the back door, or training collar, leash, whatever you're going to need. Make sure that it's readily available. If you have to go find it every time you have to let your dog out to go potty, you're less likely to follow through. So set yourself up to succeed. Another thing that you talked about, so number one is don't give commands unless you're willing and able to follow through.
Couldn't agree more.
Number two, set the dog up to succeed when you're not paying attention and set them up to fail when you are. So if you know that dog will blow you off for the squirrel, again, set yourself up to succeed in terms of when you do let the dog out, set them up with the long line on so that we're able to follow through. And then set them up to fail when you've got the line on them, you know they're going to blow you off, so you've got your leash on them and you're ready to go. And then set yourself to succeed. If you know that there's a squirrel out there, don't let the dog out. You know that they're just going to blow you off, they're going to go out there barking. Same thing if I have a dog, like a pet dog that's jumping up on the counters. Set the dog up to succeed. Don't leave a sandwich up there unless you're ready to go. Right. And then set the dog up to fail. Leave a sandwich on there when you've got whatever you have to correct the dog, and let the dog fail and learn that there's consequences for that. But if sometimes the dog jumps up and eats the sandwich, and sometimes they jump up and they get a correction, you're keeping that hope alive. So that's not good. So set the dog up to succeed, set them up to fail. And then the third one is freedom is earned with good behavior. So if the dog hasn't earned off-leash freedom, don't give them off-leash freedom. They have to earn it. If your dog makes very bad choices and destroys your house, don't leave them free in the house. They haven't earned that freedom yet. So freedom is earned with good behavior. Don't let that dog have more freedom than they're willing to handle. And with puppies, basically that means none. So with my puppies, they're either in a dog run or in an outside run that I don't have to worry about them digging up stuff, chewing on stuff they're not supposed to. They only have their toys. They really can't get into trouble. They're on a leash with me. They're in an exercise pen in the house, or they're on a leash. But they don't have freedom because they haven't earned it yet.
And they're not able to practice bad behaviors when you're not watching them.
Yep.
To bounce off of the very first rule that you were talking about, what are your thoughts on informal commands? That's something I often tell people. I'm like, if you're not ready to reinforce a command, use informal. And for me, an example of informal is like, come on guys, let's go. Because that's not really a command. So if they don't listen, it's not like, okay, we're ruining our formal commands, but it still gives us an opportunity to be lazy if we need to, if we want to. So, what's your thought on that?
So like with my old Malinois, my old competition dog Grisby, he had all of his French ring commands were in French, and his informal commands were in English. So he knows, let's go, come here. But whistle is, get your butt over here and go into your spot. OPA means, focused heel, right on my next side. Let's go, or with me is just in this general vicinity. So yes, it's possible, but you're also doubling up the amount of work that you have to do. So like I say, go lay down versus coucher. Go lay down is, go find a spot and relax. Down is drop wherever you are, and those elbows better hit the ground. So it really just depends. Make sure that you are giving those commands and being consistent with them. So if you can't be consistent with your regular commands, then give yourself informal commands that you can mess with those. But if I have a dog that's out in the backyard, I wouldn't even call it an informal command. If I know that they're not going to come, I go, puppy, 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 hey!
Right.
Whatever. But I don't really count that as an informal command. I count that as like, do what you have to do to get the dog, distracted and focused on you, and then get him inside. So, you can call it whatever you want, but I do have like my French commands, which are for French ring, and that way I know that people aren't going to go, sit, sit, sit to my competition dog and mess things up. So I like to have kind of my informal commands in English, and my competition commands are in French. It just makes it more clear for me too, because I'm not going around the house, coucher, 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 because I actually have to think when I'm giving my commands, versus a lot of people are, down when the dog jumps up on them.
Right, instead of off or no.
Yeah. So it's easier to have it in a separate language just because it makes you think about it. I'm not fluent in German or in French. I'm getting there, but so it's a lot easier to use those commands because the dog also understands that I'm only talking to them when I'm speaking that language. So I can be talking to a pet client telling them, put your dog in a down, and my dog's not like, oh, were you talking to me? Because he doesn't understand down. His is coucher. So it allows me to be able to go, it allows me it allows my dog to understand when I'm talking to them, because if they hear French, I'm only talking to them. So it makes it more clear about the commands.
Oh, another thing that I noticed that I really like about your training style and how you work with dogs is you have each command sound very, very distinct from one another. And that's one of my biggest issues is I do make my commands sound different from the way that I talk, but often my commands do sound similar to each command. Like I have the same voice, down, sit, and that's something I've been trying to work on. But with you, every command is so distinct in the way you say it and how your rise and inflection of your voice changes that it makes it so incredibly clear. And it's one of the videos of yours that you posted with, I think, Hammer. And you're giving the commands, and I shared it. I'm like, you guys need to check this out. Notice how she says her commands. Very distinct, and they're always the same. Like your down always sounds the same. That's something a lot of people struggle with, especially with verbal markers. Yes! Instead of yes or click.
That's why clickers are more clear for the dog than a verbal marker, because unless you're going yes, 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 yes,
like a broken record,
and you can be consistent with your yeses and not yay like you were doing, it makes it more clear. Like the click is the same no matter if you hold it down or you're slower to click. When it clicks, it's the exact same noise. For the dogs, it's very clear. Most people also, unless you've got a 2-year-old, aren't going around just clicking to click. So it makes it more clear, like when they hear that click is for them. So, like with Grisby, my old competition dog, his verbal marker was, and that was
what? Oh, nice.
And that was his, that was his click, and it was just very easy. A lot of people use yes, but just it makes it very easy, and it's quiet, and I can use it to cue some things, And so I like something that's very distinct sound versus yes, yes, yes.
Yeah,
unless you can be
do.
very consistent with your yeses. But I'll be go, yes.
Yeah, drag it out, or they're excited and they go, yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
So whatever your markers are, just be clear with them. But that's the nice thing about the French language also, is in English, like I have my current competition dog, my German Shepherd, he was a pet dog before, so he was trained in English. So instead of trying to train everything, I said, well, I'll just try keeping him in English because it'll be easier. But a lot of the American commands or the English commands are very similar. Sit, stand, stay. Sit, stand, stay. It's very...
I had issues. And spin.
Yeah.
I had sit,
Yeah.
stand, spin.
Yeah, so a lot of them, they're all one syllable, all very short. They all start with the S. So like for positions in French, it's assis, couché, debout. So it's they all start with different words. They're all 2 syllables. It's very easy. You know, sit, stand, down. The sit, stand, stay, they're all very, so when I'm doing it, it's sit. I put emphasis on I almost make it into 2 syllables. Stand, sit.
Yes,
Stand, so I can use my voice to help the dog kind of differentiate, and then stay. So I use kind of a lower voice for my stays, so it makes it a little bit more clear for the dog what I want. But it's still, French is just much easier because they're all 2 syllable, and they all have, the positions start with different words.
Are there certain commands you are required to use in French ring?
Yes. So if you look at the rule book, there's commands that you have to use. So before you start any sport, and especially if you're going to be in a club that's serious about competing, read the rule book. Because it's something that you can do at home, that you can understand. If you have questions, you can always bring them to the club and ask those questions. But if you ask questions that are in the rule book, that are right there, simply outlined, but you just have been too lazy to go through and read, you're wasting the club's time. If you're too lazy to look it up on your own, don't waste our time. You don't want to waste your time doing the research. Don't waste our time asking the questions.
French ring rules are difficult.
They are difficult. But again,
difficult.
at least if you read through it, even if you don't understand everything, at least you go, oh, okay, yeah, I remember that. Because you have that to refer. If you go, oh, this is too hard, I don't want to do it, I don't have the time, I don't whatever, well, don't waste our time when you don't want to waste your own personal time.
Right.
You can also, if you have an iPhone, click on the audio, and it'll read the rules to you. So even now, whenever I'm going to a competition, on my way there, I'll copy, I'll select the audio or the speak, and my iPhone will read the rules to me, just so that way I'm always kind of getting refreshed on the rules. But in terms
the rules can change too. I mean, so it's
they can change, but in general, I mean, since I've been doing it, I don't think there's been too many rule changes. Besides the Palisade and some other things, but
it is important though for any sport. I mean, AKC, I believe they changed a few rules since I started learning
and
about
IGP
AKC
has changed theirs too. I mean, they change the name every other week, so it's just read the rules, even if you have questions, or have the rule book printed out, and that way when somebody's talking, you can flip through there and read it. But at least understand kind of the general, overall of what the rules are, what the commands are, because there are a list of commands that you're allowed to use depending on the language. So
this actually brings me to a very interesting question, I think, is with the stay. So in French ring, they do require you to say stay.
No.
Oh, I thought they did.
No, stay is optional.
Oh, okay.
You have to give a placement. So if you walk up to your start line and the dog is already sitting, you still have to tell them to sit.
Okay.
But
So
the
you
stay
don't
is
have to
optional.
say- Okay. I was thinking that the stay was something you had to teach them, like that word. When you teach a dog stay, do you use the stay word, or do you just require them to maintain a position if you give them a commanded position such as sit or down or place?
So I almost use it as an extra command. So I do teach an implied, but then I also teach them stay. So like for French ring, you are allowed to, you're allowed to say stay, right? So if we're doing the food refusal, which essentially I'm walking my dog, I tell them to down, you can tell them to stay, and then you go behind a blind and somebody comes up and tries to get your dog to eat the food. They throw a couple pieces of, depending on the level, brevet it's 1 piece, ring 1, 2, 3 is all 4 pieces of food. So if I want to give myself an extra command, in French for stay you can either use rest or pas bouger. One is stay and the other one's don't move. So you can say either one of those commands, okay? So I can teach my dog that pas bouger means leave it.
See, I like that. Because
so I'm not breaking the rules, but my dog knows that pas bouger means leave it. So I can tell my dog that, hey, this is going to be the food refusal. As I walk up, I can tell them coucher, pas bouger, and they go, okay, leave it. And then without giving an extra command, I'm commanding my dog that this is the food refusal and leave it without breaking any of the rules. Same thing on my jumps. So on the jumps, the dog jumps. Again, you don't have to say stay, but if my stay means down, I'm able to anchor my dog here because you're not allowed to say down, but you can give an optional stay command.
I really like that you say that, because something that I constantly tell people when I'm training them, and in my stay video I say I don't use the word stay because I feel it doesn't make much sense in a dog's mind if we look at the concept of predictability, and that's how our dogs learn what words mean. Words mean essentially what they predict to the dog. So if you think about every word we use, sit, down, come, heel, spin, roll over, play dead, even our markers, yes, everything predicts something. And then we say stay and it doesn't predict anything. It doesn't change the situation. And what I've told people is, I have trainer friends, for example, that will teach stay, but they teach stay as a commanded position, such as a sit, or as you said, a down, or a leave it.
So I do say stay, but like if I put my dog and I said, say I'm training, I say down, stay, and I walk away. If the dog got up, I wouldn't say stay, I would say down.
Or down, okay.
Because stay, they're like, well, stay standing, stay what? For me, stay essentially is just telling the dog there's going to be duration.
Or like just maintain or freeze in that position in a sense.
Yeah.
So if your dog's walking and you say stay, would your dog have to stop moving?
Technically.
So then at that point you are using stay as predicting something. It is predicting something to change the current situation the dog is in. And I think that's important to be able to recognize that. And I love the fact that you said that you use it, which one, Dabu, what is it? Sorry. Babuche for the leave it command, which is, it's brilliant. I mean, and that's how the top dog trainers do it. They find ways to use the rules correctly.
If you know the rules.
Exactly. And then use it to get the best possible results. And talking about predictability, I do want to talk a little bit more about the come when called, again, because I think it's one of the most important commands, whether it's for sport or personally.
Yep, I agree.
What are some of the things that I've seen personally why people cause problems with their come when called is because of that concept of predictability, but in a way that doesn't benefit the owner. So for example, they have their dog at the dog park. I don't recommend dog parks, but you know, dogs love dog parks, right? And let's say somebody has their dog at the dog park. And the reason why, let's just touch on that real quick. The reason why I don't like recommending dog parks is because I don't know the dogs there. I don't know if they're sick. I don't want them to attack a dog that I'm taking there and they have a bad experience. You kind of feel the same way.
Yeah.
But let's say someone has their dog.
Yeah, we'll make that rule number 4, no dog parks.
Or let's say the dog's at any park, an open field, and the dog's having a good time, and they're running around, and they're playing, and the owner calls the dog to them, the dog comes to them, they hook the leash on them, and they leave.
Yeah, they just punish the dog.
They taught the dog, if you come to me, the fun's over.
Yep.
And I see that all the time. Same thing when the dog is at the house. I talk about this with potty training. Dog goes potty for the very first time, and they take the dog inside and put the dog in the crate. Well, now the dog's not going to want to
Or the dog that's barking at the squirrel, same thing, the dog does come, they just end playtime because they lock the dog in the house.
And the dog's like, well, I'm definitely not going to come next time. Yeah, what are some other things that you may have seen with people using or improperly communicating with their dog? Like, here's another one that I've seen before is someone's trying to get something from their dog. Let's say the dog picks up something, has it in their mouth, and they're trying to get it back from the dog.
Yeah.
They finally get it back from the dog, and then they correct the dog. Well, what did they just teach the dog?
Yeah, when you finally let it go, you get corrected.
And then they want to hold on to it even longer. What are some things you ran into with people that you've trained or taught how to train that is something that may be common mistakes in just personal training or even Frenchering?
It's not about you. It's about the dog. A lot of people go, oh, I got these treats, and they're, little milk bones or something, and the dog doesn't give 2 shits about it. It's not about you, it's about the dog. What does the dog want? What does the dog like? Does the dog like the string cheese? Does the dog like hot dogs? Does the dog like chicken strips? What does the dog like? I've had clients that have to go to McDonald's and get, sausage McMuffins before training because their dogs have no food motivation. Grandma keeps feeding them at home, and so they have to just use super high value treats, and it is what it is. You have to do what you have to do. Chicken nuggets, Flying Dutchman, puppy patties, whatever. Like, find something that your dog actually likes and use that as motivation. If your dog likes to run laps around the field, then use that as a reward. The dog comes, great, break, let them do their laps, call them back, do some healing, great, break. They get to go back out and do it. What does your dog like? Does your dog like to chase stuff? Does your dog like to eat? Does your dog like to play or, tug, fight? What does your dog like? And use that as the reward. A lot of people like to use petting. The dogs don't like petting half the time.
Some do.
Some do, but when
Some
they're doing
rather
bite work,
enjoy.
they don't want to come back for cuddle time, right?
Right.
They want, yay, good job. This is football season. They don't want to, just like a football player doesn't want to go on the sideline and then hug their girlfriend and cuddle for 5 minutes, right? They slap their butts, you bum chest, like it's a more worked up situation. So you have to match the dog's intensity and give them what they want in that moment. So sometimes the dog comes back, I'll pat them on the side and I'll push them away from me and they'll come back and, we'll do this and really play with them because that's what they want. If the dog wants a toy and I'm like, well, here, take some food. Sometimes I'm punishing the dog. I'm making them take a lower value when they really don't want that. So think about what the dog wants in that situation and try to reward with that. At the same time, talking about switching from food to toys, for me, a dog is balanced when they can switch back and forth. If a dog refuses to drink water because they're so worked up, that they're tired and they're super thirsty, but there's a decoy in the field, so they refuse to drink water. It's very common in the protection sports. For me, the dog is imbalanced. You need to have more control. The dog needs to be more in a thinking state of mind because their brain is off. Or if you offer a dog a piece of steak and they're like, no, there's a decoy over there. Your value needs to be transferred more to yourself than it is the decoy. So usually if the dogs can't switch back and forth and they normally have really high food drive, I'll work more on obedience than drive for the decoy to maintain some of that balance.
Or create the balance.
Yeah. And a lot of times I don't even use food for later training, but you'll see there's a Tervuren in my old club that used to refuse to take water when there was bite work going on. I mean, the dog would be dead tired, eyes red, just tongue hanging out, but that dog would not drink water if there was bite work.
Then how would you get to drink water? You had to take it off the field?
No, the dog just wouldn't drink.
Oh, wow.
And so the dog, you really run the risk of overheating the dog and making problems because the dog is so imbalanced because they want to bite so bad that you run either having to abandon if the dog is, starting a heat stroke or something because the dog won't even drink water. So it's really important that, for me, it's important that you should be able to switch between doing food stuff to be able to do bite work stuff and be able to go from doing a bite work exercise to now we're going to do the hurdle, even with the decoy in the field. And PSA is great at that, right? You're doing obedience thing while the decoys are, yelling and trying to encourage the dog to bite. And the dog has to be clear enough to stay focused on the task at hand. And in order to do that, you have to have a very balanced dog. You can't have a monster for the bite and lose all that control. So I like I like that aspect of that sport. And campaign, which is another French sport, is also very like that, where you can switch from a jump to a protection and now 2 more obedience and then a bite and then a jump. And you have to have a very balanced dog that can go from working to off and then working to off. And police dogs are the same way. They can't be, I want to bite, I want to bite, I want to bite. They have to stay calm enough so that way they're not just spinning in their car all day and then they have no energy when they do come out to work.
Right.
So for me, it's very important that you maintain that balance, or else you don't have a dog that you can go the long run with because the dog is just so out of whack that they can't, sometimes even just drink water.
And speaking of rewards, this is another common question that's asked. You start off with continual reinforcement. Mm-hmm. You're rewarding the dog. What is your best way, or how do you like to explain to people the best process for spacing out those rewards? I love the analogy that you told me years ago, and I tell everybody this analogy.
The piece of cake?
No. The one when they start out, they want to be a vending machine, but as the dog gets better, they have to transfer into a slot machine.
Yeah.
Where the dog thinks there's the possibility they're going to get a reward, but they're not going to get it every time. But that belief that the reward is possible is what continues that motivation.
Yeah.
How do you explain to your students, and because you train trainers too, what do you do to teach them that?
So little kids, right, they go to kindergarten, they get participation awards, everybody gets stickers for everything that you do, and you get smiley, faces on your homework. There's a lot of positive reinforcement. And then when you're in college, you're just expected to do your work. But you don't skip from kindergarten on that continuous reinforcement, or a puppy where you're reinforcing every reward to just stop reinforcing, right? There's a gradual, progression in those rewards. So how I kind of decide, does the dog need a reward or not, is if it's a piece of cake. So if it's a piece of cake, they don't need one, right? If they sit before they jump in the crate, you don't need to give them a treat for that. The reward is just getting into the crate because then they get to go to training. Or if the dog, I've been having problems with the dog in the backyard barking at the squirrel. There's a squirrel, I call my dog to come and they come. That's a big deal. I'm going to make sure that I pay them for that because that was not an easy choice. If the dog just finished potty and they're already coming my direction and I call them to come, I'm not going to give them a treat for that. That wasn't hard for them. So I'm only going to reward where I know that it was a hard choice for them and they made the right choice. And then I'm going to pay them for that.
Do you have a way where you start to recognize as well with, I like that you say it's easy, or if the command's easy for the dog. So do you mean like, for example, you say down, the dog just lays down. You don't have to assist the dog. You don't have to help with the physical cue. They just start to do it. That's kind of the indication that it's becoming easy for them?
So like we'll talk about auto sits as an example. So an auto sit is when the dog automatically sits when you stop when you're healing. So if I'm doing my healing and I'm teaching the dog, usually I walk. When I stop, I pull up, the dog sits, I reward him. I'll do that. I'll continually do that. And then I'll start fading my hand signal. And then if the dog sits on their own, I'll reward them. If I have to help them and I'll lure them, I usually won't reward them at that point. So now I'm switching to from rewarding them every single time and helping them every single time to fading my hand signal. And if they offer it on their own, giving them that treat. If I have to help them, I'm not giving it to them. And that gives them the motivation to do it on their own. I'll do that. And then once the dog is reliably doing it, then I'll do, like, if I got a really fast sit, I'll reward that. Or the dog's in the perfect position, I'll reward that. Something that's a little bit better. If you don't ask for more, the dog's not going to give you more. So a lot of people get stuck at luring every single time because they never ask for more. And if you are helping the dog every single time, you're doing the work for the dog versus the dog doing this behavior and trying to get the reward. So, and that's the difference for me between a reward and a bribe. Is a bribe, the food comes first, and a reward, it comes second.
I like that, yeah.
So it's okay to reward the dog, it's not okay to bribe. So luring essentially is bribing. We're taking the food, we're using the food to get the behavior, but it's contingent upon the food being in my hand. So I want to get rid of that as soon as possible.
And get it to where they're doing it in the anticipation of receiving a reward for doing it correctly. Believe it or not, we do not have too much time left. So I do want to hit up some of the questions that I've been asked on protection.
Okay.
Some of them are very... I think they'll be pretty straightforward and easy to answer. So one was, how do I teach my dog to attack? And all these questions that people ask on my channel, I always respond to them. I try to give people the best answer that I can quickly through a comment. So what I told them, it's, with anything, it's about teaching the behavior first. And what we do in the videos, or what you do, I should say, in the French ring introduction videos that we do, is you make it a game. You make it fun. You have the puppies playing with, I think you're using a flirt pole, or you're using a rag on a rope or something like that. So how do you introduce it for them?
So just like you said, number one is get the behavior. So if I'm kind of define your behavior too. So if attack means go forward and bite something, right? We'll just do that for the sake of today. The number one is to get that behavior. So if I'm sure that I can get my dog to do it, sometimes I'll hold them back by a collar, thick collar or their harness, and I'll hold them back, and they're pulling. I'll say, and I'll say attack. And when I say attack, then I'm gonna let them go. And they'll go and bite. We'll play. I'll do it again. I'll throw it out. I'll hold them back. Ready, attack. I let them go. They go out and bite. So I'm sure that the dog is gonna give me that behavior that I'm looking for. And then you can just switch it to other objects, decoys or whatever.
And with attack, I think it's important because some people, I don't want people to just go out there and start trying to teach their dog attack. I mean, when we do it for the sport, it's prey drive. The dogs enjoy it. And more often than not, the dogs see the decoy as just
a sparring partner.
Yeah, and somebody wearing their toy. And that's why a lot of these sport protection dogs, you can work with them in a bite suit and then take the jacket off and go pet them and hang out with them. But then, of course, there's other times, because you work with a lot of police officers as well, right? Or I don't know how many you work with, but I've worked with a couple with you guys. And the training has to be a little bit different for that. What are some of the big differences when it comes to a working dog on the street with maybe a police officer or military working dog in comparison to the sport?
So again, everything depends on the dog. So some dogs take their work very seriously, and some of them it's just a big game. If the dog has the right drives, it's very easy to teach them that you don't have to have a suit, you can just bite whatever. As long as the dog has the right character. If the dog is a little bit tentative and they're like, oh no, I can't bite you, I don't want to hurt your feelings, then it really doesn't have the right drives to be a police dog anyways. Police dogs need to be able to pass everywhere and bite anything. So if you're switching from like IPO or IGP, they do this a lot where they'll agitate the dog with the sleeve, they'll put it down, they'll go to the side, and they'll kind of agitate the dog civilly. Civilly?
I think that's right. I always call it putting them in defense.
Okay, they put them on defense, whatever. They get them on just the man, not the suit. They agitate the dog. When the dog is showing good barking, good aggression, they'll go back, grab it, and then feed the dog. Or they'll put it behind their back so that way the dog is looking at them. When they get the right behavior, they'll back up, and then they'll come back and they'll feed the dog. There's also like hidden sleeves and things like that you can use to transfer the dog.
Too, right?
Probably. There's fake arms. There's all kinds of stuff now, but most of the time, and there's some people who, they want to do that and they want to do the, bonsai kind of attack training and stuff. But once you start getting into that stuff, it really turns, for me, if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't have a lot of control and a really good group that's working with you, it turns into a huge liability.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's why I wanted to mention the two, going back to the command, how do I teach my dog to attack? If one of my friends call me up and let's say they live on the other side of the world, and they say, hey, I want to teach my dog an attack. Well, I'm going to teach them how to do it in a way where it's prey drive for the dog and it's fun for the dog. Because more often than not, when somebody does have a dog, so a lot of times when people are thinking protection dog, what are they thinking? The dog actually protecting them, right? Well, more often than not, if you have a Malinois or a Dutch Shepherd or German Shepherd or any of these working style dogs, that's a deterrent, usually enough. And then if you want to teach the dog to even be more of a deterrent, I always recommend just teach the dog to bark.
Yep.
And that brings me to my next question, because I put a video up last week on how to teach your dog to bark, and I used the frustration techniques, and not the knocking on the wall or holding something in my hand waiting for the dog to bark. And that's the beauty about the science of dog training. It's whatever gets the dog to do it.
Get the behavior.
Right. I always enjoy using the frustration, putting them on the back tie and doing a form of dry building, getting them to bark and letting them realize the bark is what brings the reward to them. So we're teaching them to bark to get the reward. And a question I had was, how do I teach my dog to continually bark on command?
So that's just duration.
And it's situation-based, I think, too, because that's another thing with the search and escort. The dog has to come around, find the decoy, and bark, correct? Until the...
So they only have to bark once.
Oh, really?
They don't have to, like in IGP, they want that consistent, wah, 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 wah.
Right.
In Frenching, they could walk in and go, wah, and
No
then just
kidding.
lay down there quietly.
But they never do that.
They don't. Because, again, the dog is saying, move, 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 move. And it's that duration. If the dog came through and barked twice and then the decoy ran and the dog bit, the next time come back, wah, wah. Well, that didn't work. Wah. And then the decoy left. He goes, okay, keep, move, move, move. That's what the dog is kind of yelling at the decoy, like, move, I want that bite. Because we've taught them that when they come in, the decoy is not moving, you're supposed to be barking. And so then you're just adding that duration. So like if we're training it, initially, one bark gets a bite. And then maybe one bark gets a bite, and now I'm gonna ask for more. And now I want 2 barks, and then you get a bite. Now I'm gonna wait, wah, 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 and maybe they're quiet, like, what the heck? Wah! Okay, now you get it. And then you just build up that. So all it is duration. You're just keeping that hope alive that if you bark, you can make this guy move. And I like doing the barking in that frustration because it does have some kind of anger behind it almost, because the dog's like, give me it, go, move,
right.
give me, So it's not just, chasing something or, the boogeyman. It's the dog is being demanding and forward and more powerful because they're essentially demanding something with their bark. It's not like, so you get a lot of heart and a lot of, a real bark versus like the, because they're like, give me it, move, let me have what I want.
So they almost, when you put them in the right situation, they almost will instinctively bark more, and that's why, during that routine or that exercise, rather, in the sport, every dog continues to bark until the decoy moves.
Yep.
I think every single French ring competition I've watched, the dog continues to bark.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great answer for that person's question. The other question that was asked was the out command, which the out command is going to be different to each sport, and of course with police training.
Yep.
What are some of the really big differences when it comes to teaching a police canine, a working police canine, and out in comparison to French ring? I think French ring is probably the most extreme when it comes to outing instantly.
Yeah. IGP now, they require a fast out.
They time it like French ring?
Yeah, I don't know the exact rules, but I know that when it has to be a pretty quick out. So my kind of thinking behind it is if you get bit by a police dog, like the dog does not need to let go, right? I don't want the dog outing and then biting upper arm, or the guy yells, "Hey, ow!" and the dog pops off right away, right? The dog needs to hold on there until the handler comes up to the dog, and then if the dog takes 5 seconds, blah, blah, out, that's actually a pretty good out for a police dog. They tend to not have an out, usually have to do a tactical out.
That's also, they don't want, I think it's called, isn't it called the blue fog? If they send in, I think I heard it somewhere, I could be wrong, but they send the dog in, the dog goes in, takes down the bad guy, they all run in, and they don't want the dog to, well, you said let go and start chewing, because I think every single bite, there has to be a new report on it, right?
I don't know how that works, but
I'm not sure either. But they also don't want the dog to let go and bite a police officer.
Yep.
So by having it, so the approach is going to be different, because I've seen a couple of videos that people have posted with a police dog biting somebody and then not outing right away, and people are like, they can't even train the dog to out.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, well, it's situational. It's a much different thing.
Yeah.
And like you said, you also don't want the dog to think they're supposed to out.
The biggest thing that in that situation for me is the handlers need to know how to handle their dogs. So they need to know when it's time to out, how for their dog do they out. Does the dog actually have a verbal out that they can use, but it takes 5 seconds or 2 seconds or whatever? Does that dog have that? Or do you know that your dog is not going to out and you need to be prepared and out your dog? You need to be the one that outs the dog. And there's break sticks that like they used to use for dog fighting, and essentially you stick it in the back of their jaw and you turn and it pops open their mouth, so that way that you can actually get the dog to out. Or you'll grab the collar and twist, and when they eventually need air, they let go of the bite. There's different ways that you can get the dog to forcefully to out if they don't do it. And I don't know, in my opinion, they need the police canine handlers need to be more aware of the ways to manually out your dog, because when they're all, revved up and the bad guy's been kicking them, they're like, yes, this is my revenge. When the guy is finally subdued and they're taking that back out on the guy. So the handlers need to know how to manually out their dogs if the dog is not going to respond to verbal commands, because there's no reason that the dog should be, out, and it takes them 30 seconds. Like you can out a dog manually a lot faster than that if they know how.
Yes.
So I think the handlers should all know how to manually out their dog efficiently. And I don't know if they train that as much as they probably should.
Well, with the French ring, though, French ring,
you have to have a super clean out.
It has to be very quick,
yes.
too. I mean, you can lose a lot of points.
Yeah,
if you have
by the T on out or on the T on alt, the dog has to be out. So a lot of the times in training, at least what we do, is we teach the dog to out on their name. So if like Jean-Luc's dog Highlander, he does a 3-syllable name, so that way it's longer, and then he's got the out. So he's got Highlander out, so he's got 4 seconds from when he starts talking to the T, the dog essentially has to let go. If I have a dog named Cash, for example, Cash out, there's 2 seconds.
Much faster, yeah.
So again, if you know the sport, you know how it's scored, you can kind of even name your puppy appropriately. I like a 2-syllable. I think 3 is too long. For me, just be going, Highlander, OPA, Highlander, it's a lot. I like a 2-syllable, Grisby, Hammer, Gunner, Sadie. I like short doo-doo. It gives you, if it was gunner out, I've got three syllables by the time the dog can let go. Also, how you say it. So I go, gunner out. I use my gun for the gunner to get the dog to out. If I'm going, hammer out, he's like, screw you, and he keeps doing it. So that's where you use your voice to get the dog. And the way that I say it too, it's very abrupt when he hears his name. It's gun. I have behind it to help the dog know that it's time to let go.
And I think that is what the person was asking. They want a very quick and responsive out. So how do you start teaching that?
So a lot of times, if you have problems outing the decoy, you have problems outing elsewhere. So I've never seen one person who has problems with just the decoy. But if they say out on a tug, the dog boom immediately. Or you say out on a ball, they out immediately. Most of the time, if you have 4 seconds slow to out on a decoy, you have at least 2 on a tug. I can almost guarantee you, if you're having problems with outing on a decoy, you have outing problems other places. So if you do your homework and you clean up where you can, it does 2 things. You're not creating any negative associations with the decoy because you're cleaning it up elsewhere, and then that's going to transfer over to your decoy work. So I always tell people, clean up your outs, off the decoy. That can be with the dog.
Easy.
Yeah, that could be with the dog on a back tie and you're playing with a wedge, and really getting it moving and getting the dog out. a lot of times what people do too is they only out off of things that aren't moving. So they'll be playing with the dog and then they freeze up, they tell the dog to out. And if the dog is biting a suit and it's up here, it's the decoy a lot of times is still moving with each punch. And so that keeps the game alive. So if you've never taught the dog to out on a moving tug, good luck getting them to out on a moving decoy. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do to clean up your outs away from the decoy, because if you have super crisp outs everywhere else, you're more likely to have a crisp out on the decoy.
Yeah, that makes sense. What if you do have a dog that is really struggling with an out, like even on a tug or a ball, and maybe value transfer is not working? Are there other certain techniques you might implement to try to get the dog to do it better or faster? Or
Yeah, it just depends on the dog. So that's the kind of the you have to training. Yes, it's worth your while. We've done our transfers. We've done, giving it back. We've done all of that stuff. And the dog goes, no, I want to keep what I have. And that's where you go, well, yeah, you have to out.
Now you have to use some pressure or something like that. Yeah, I talk about that a little bit in my out video. If the value transfer is not working, if you can't get the dog to trade for something, then sometimes that's when we do have to use a little bit of force. And then, of course, once the dog knows, then they do it willingly because you've done that training.
And a lot of times when I do the force, again, that's why I want to do it away from the decoy. Because if I'm doing the force with the decoy, now I can have a dog that's more nervous on the bite, or they're changing their grip, anticipating the outs, or they're really vocal on their out, or they're really vocal on their bite on the decoy, anticipating any kind of conflict with the out. So a lot of times what I'll do if I'm having issues with an out is I'll do it where I'm just walking with the dog and a toy in their mouth, and I'll tell them to out it. There's no tension on it. There's no nothing. If they can't drop a toy on their out when I'm just walking with them, again, good luck when it's alive. And then as soon as they out, get it, and then I'll let them get it again, and I'll do that. And then I can start where I'm actually playing with the dog, and I ask them to out again, and then I'll give it right back to them. And then I'll do that with the decoy, where as soon as they out, boom, they get that bite right back. So I am doing, even though I'm starting to introduce pressure and the you have to's, I'm also going back to using more reinforcement than I would if I was just doing my transfers.
And that means if you need to, you can go back a step. That's something I talk about.
Yeah, and whenever I have any kind of a problem, I always go back. You always can go back to your foundation, which is why it's very important to have a good foundation. Right. And that's the biggest problem that I'm having with my Shepherd is I didn't get him till he was 2, and he was a pet dog before. So I did do his pet dog obedience, but if he laid down and flopped on a hip, I didn't care. He's just a pet dog. And now I'm trying to clean up all of that stuff. For my retrieves before, for the last, for his first 2 years, he brought the ball back and dropped at your feet. Well, I need him to hold and sit it now. And so now I'm trying to undo 2 years of problems to try to get a good retrieve. And again, this is why it's easier if you know from puppyhood that this is the sport that you're doing, these are the rules. It's a lot easier if I would have taught him from 8 weeks of age or however old he was, that this is how we're going to do it because this is what our goal is. It makes it much easier than going, oh, well, for 2 years, it's okay that you drop it at my feet, and now I want you to sit straight and hold it until I take it from you. And instead of just healing with a loose leash, now I want your neck by my leg, and your shoulders can't go in front, and now your head can't go behind. So now I'm trying to go back and fix all of those things, and it's a much, much easier to teach it right from the start.
Because they haven't developed all the
bad habits. And that's another thing, going back to French Ring, is if you are going to be joining a club, find your club and let them do your bite work.
I couldn't agree more. Yep. Because then they're going to know what's the best way for that specific sport, whether it's French Ring, Mondio Ring, PSA. Last protection question, then we'll wrap this up. So another question that was asked is, how do I teach my dog a alert or bark kind of command, but to look at what I feel is the threat? I'm trying to phrase it kind of how I did in the question. So what I'm going to explain how I would do it really quickly and see if you add to it or what you would do. Okay. First, I would just do basically the way I taught barking in the video with Harley. Have her on a back tie, tease her with a toy. She barks, I reward her. Then I put it on a command. Usually if I'm having somebody that I'm teaching their dog this deterrent, I have them say easy or something like that. So it's like, easy boy, it's not get him or something like that. So then I have them say easy. So if you're the handler, I would have you say easy. Then I move and kind of agitate the dog. They bark, I reward them. Then I start doing it where I'm hiding around the corner. I have them say easy. Then I come around the corner with a toy. Dog barks at me, I reward them. Then I have them randomly walk around the neighborhood. I tell them where I'm going to be hiding. Once they get to that location, I have them say easy. I pop out of nowhere. Dog barks at me. I reward them. So then the dog starts to believe every time my owner says easy,
there's going to be
this
something.
dude with this toy is going to pop out, and I'm going to be able to get that toy if I bark at him. So I feel like that's a pretty good way to do it, where it's a deterrent, but it's not actually teaching the dog to bite out of anger or aggression or anything like that. It's just, here's a deterrent. Great.
Yeah.
Now it's not really liability, or you're going to have any liability issues.
Yeah. I mean, that's good if you have two people. If you're by yourself, another thing that you can do is, so if you have the dog that's on a back tie, you could use like a horse lunging whip, and then put your toy on the end of it, and then you can have that fishing out in front of you, and then tell the dog to bark, and you can kind of keep that toy alive. The dog barks, yes, and you can let him go forward. And that way you're next to the dog's focus is forward, and then you're rewarding it that way. So that's something you can do by yourself. And you can even have the dog on a leash, throw that out in front, tell the dog watch him or bark, or can I help you, whatever your word is. The dog, doesn't bark. You can frustrate the dog by moving it in front of you while you're still next to the dog. That way the dog's attention is here. The dog barks, yes, you can let him go forward, and then you can start to ask for more, and then you can start to put it where the ball is already on the field. You tell your dog to, whatever your command is, the dog goes for it, wah, 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 get it, and then you can transfer it to people. And you can just ask, hey, your neighbor, hey, put a ball behind your back, and same thing. Then you can even show the dog at first and then hide it until the dog assumes that anybody that you say to watch it is going to have one.
And I prefer that because it's a friendly way to do it. It's nice. You're not putting the dog in defense. You're not creating stress. Because I have done it before in the past, and I forget who it was I was talking to, and they said, I don't like doing that because it is putting the dog in defense.
I think it was me.
It might have been, yeah. And that's the way I used to do it. Was I'd come out and I'd act like a bad guy, and I would get the dog to bark at me. But in the beginning, some dogs are more nervous. They're worried. They might be looking at you cautious. They give the smallest little bark, and I act like their bark is shooting me.
Yeah.
And I go back. But yeah, it was putting them into a different mindset than, hey, this is play. This is fun. Yeah. And I always think it's better to make it play and make it fun.
The other thing, too, is if you have a dog that's super confident, they're like, why would I, yeah, he's acting weird, but he's not a threat. Like, they just don't care. They're like, yeah, he's really weird, but I'm so confident in myself, like, there's no reason to bark at this guy. And then you have to start doing it at night in different situations, but then again, you're teaching the dog that when you are scared, that you handle being scared with that aggression. And now you're asking the dog to determine who's a threat and who's not a threat. And dogs have the brain capacity of a 3-year-old. Like, I wouldn't trust my 3-year-old or my 2-year-old to choose who's good and who's bad.
Right.
Like, I don't trust the dog to make those decisions. If something were to actually happen, that's where genetically, like, either the dog's going to do it or not. But in my kind of, my comparison to this is if somebody pulls a gun, right? You're not going to ask, is that loaded before you do what they say, right? If somebody pulls a gun on you and you're like, whoa, you're going to back away from them, you're going to do whatever they say. It's the same as a dog that's barking. They're not like, are you barking for your toy, right? They're like, oh, okay, there's a big shepherd that's at the end of his leash barking at me, like, I'm probably going to go find somebody else or go to the next house.
That's a great analogy.
You really don't need bullets inside. If you have a dog that will actually bite, or if you have a gun that's loaded, you don't let kids play with your gun. You have to know where it is all the time. You have to lock it away when you can't watch it. There's a lot more responsibility that comes with that loaded gun or that dog that is trained in defense or will actually bite. Some people do need a loaded gun or a dog that's actually going to bite, but you can't take it everywhere as if it is the dog that's just a deterrent. So that's where you have to kind of decide, do I really need a dog that's going to bite? And am I prepared to build a kennel run, put a lock on it, make sure that I know where that dog is all the time, that he's always under control, that nobody else can play with it? Do I have a boarding kennel that can handle the dog? If something were to happen to me, are you prepared for all of those things? Because if something were to happen to you, you get in a car crash on your way home, heaven forbid, who's going to take care of that dog?
Right.
So you have to have things in place, your trainer or whoever, to make sure that that dog is always taken care of. If for some reason you die, where's this dog going? Because if it's just a deterrent, it's not a big deal. If it's a dog that will actually bite, you have to be very careful.
No.
There's a lot more that goes into that.
And that's a great way to close this podcast. This is something I like to say in every protection video. If someone's going to do protection training, contact a local professional or sign up at a protection club that trains for a specific sport. So you're working with a bunch of experts that can help you guys to make sure you don't make any of the mistakes that could cause problems down the road.
Yeah.
Do you have any saved rounds?
No, yeah, work with a professional, and make sure that if you make a mistake teaching your dog to sit or come or stay, it's not a big deal. If you make mistakes during your bite work or your protection, it can be a very big deal. So make sure that you are working with a professional, make sure that you know what you're doing, make sure that you are working with somebody who's experienced, and make sure that you see the dogs that they put out and see, is that something that I want or not? Because there's a lot of trainers out there now that train these protection dogs when really they're just walking liabilities, and it's your dog. You're going to be the one that has to clean up that trainer's mess if they make problems. So make sure that if you are interested in that, find somebody who knows what they're doing, spend the extra money. Don't try to be cheap about this, because you don't want to turn your dog into a liability, and that's a big thing.
It's a long commitment to it. You have to be committed to work and continually work with your dog for sure.
Yep. And obedience.
Obedience.
Control.
Yep, absolutely, obedience. Okay, so I'm going to put in the description, I'll put links to all the 4 main ones, Monio Ring, at least the 4 main ones I know, Monio Ring, French Ring, PSA, and IGP. I'll put links in the description for you guys where you can find a local club if you want to sign up for a club. I'm also going to put all your links in the description, so if you guys are local in LA Riverside area, you can reach out to Bethany and she'll help you out as well. She is such a rock star. I freaking love her and John Luke. Thank you again for having me come down and talk and film last week. I had such a blast, and I think everyone's going to like that as well. So that's it, right?
Enjoy, yeah, and let us know if you have any questions.
Yes, definitely. Comments, like, and subscribe. Also, I've been telling Bethany she needs to start her own YouTube channel. I think it would be awesome. Let me know what you guys think. Put it in the comments. Tell her she needs to start one. All right, thanks again. Thank you, Bethany, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
Bye.